Two warships, the warship Endurance and the massive battle carrier, the Vigil, have descended into the atmosphere of Titan, flanked by hundreds of smaller vessels, all run by ARMCO pilots. Some carrying infantry, tanks, artillery, logistical support, 12 full battle groups, each with their own missions and a job to do. Capture or kill the warlord. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Captain Shaq here, and welcome back to the in-development mass multiplayer tabletop cooperative wargame, the Meta Campaign, which is a custom game that I've created to have something cool to do with the community. In a fun, ongoing story where you guys each run individual units in the field. In the last video, we covered a lot of mechanics and a bit of a recap of round 1 of campaign 3. Landing week. ARMCO landed along 4 major fronts and began to press forwards. Each battle group had chosen objectives they had come up with themselves. Battle groups like Cthulhu and Blackout attempting to capture an airfield along the southern coast, while also gunning for a power plant, hence the name Blackout. Atlas and Hammer making an attempt for the military base to the southeast, the distraction force of Icarus to the west. Prometheus landing to do a long flank around the lakes, our raiding party of light vehicles and scouts on the western front, setting up delaying fortifications with engineers, which is the battle group Rabbit, and finally the invasion of the enemy airbase to the northwest, which ended up sustaining major casualties with the loss of multiple heavy air transports. We covered a lot of this in some depth last week. This week, we're looking at round 2, and what the other battle groups found themselves stuck into during the first operations. Now remember, every unit on the board is run by a player, each talking in their battle group chats on Discord, working together and figuring out what they're going to do before issuing orders to their TACCOM, who compiles all those orders into a single intentions map that's sent to me that I transfer to the overall battle map, and then we simulate combat. All of them working toward knocking out their objectives so we can get paid. And you can't get new kit unless you get paid. Now keep in mind, this is considered a test campaign to try out some of the new mechanics, which we talked a lot in depth about in the last episode. First off, let's take a look at Rabbit, Cthulhu, and Blackout. So let's talk about Rabbit's plan, because I think it'll be one of the easier ones to knock out, and because we already talked about Rabbit's plan quite a bit in the last episode, but not so much their plan, but more using it as an example for how the mechanics work. This time, we'll talk about the plan. So Rabbit was a weird one. One of their engineers, when we first started this, learned that we managed to acquire, as a group, we acquired a bunch of these really large hovercraft landing craft, something that the US military has to drop landing forces on a beach. Literal hovercraft, using a large cushion of air to push up a coastline or up a beach. Well, these ones are, the sci-fi equivalent, so they're massive. One of the Beach Bunny's engineers said, hey, we'd like to take a look at them to make sure they're in good shape, because in the description of the event, they were really old, they had been retired, used as a barge for a city for civilian use, and then we picked them up dirt cheap. So we'd like to have an engineer take a look, make sure it's in good shape, find out what the stats are. And I let them roll for it. If they rolled high, they didn't know this, but I was gonna just give them a statted unit they could use how they wanted. If they rolled low, then I'd just tell them, look, they're in really bad shape, and the engineers or the Endurance are going to handle their use for deploying some of our battle groups along the coastline, whichever battle groups wanted to use them. We have 3 of these. They rolled as high as they possibly could, and now one of their engineers or one of their units literally drives this thing around, and it is a hover vehicle that they'll be able to use up until it's destroyed. Basically, they can use that as a unique unit type that they get to drive around. So Bunny, having access to this, asked the question, wait a minute, these are all rivers on the map, right? Can we load into what we have now called the Beach Bunny, this is their transport, and go upriver? And I said, well, yeah, of course you can. Why not? It's a water source. You've got these 2 giant fan engines on this thing. It'll push you forward. But here's the limitation of how many units they can carry. So they came up with a plan. Let's go upriver, and along the river, we will stop and we will drop off units as we go. The first drop-off point was the Mech Lance, which will drop off next to Cthulhu and Blackouts area near the village south of the power plant. That's the big red arrow. The red arrow indicates that they are advancing forward, so if they advance forward and they run into enemy contact, they'll just start shooting at that contact, right? But they want to advance up to a space between the rivers. Now they know through the mechanics of their units, reading through the unit list, that tanks and infantry, all the ground-based vehicles can't cross rivers, right? If it's on the map, it's a major river and it can't be crossed by a ground vehicle without engineers setting up a bridge. And engineers can build bridges for one supply, which are these little white boxes. You'll see them on the map later. So Beach Bunny did a drop-off for mechs so they could advance along the river to make sure that the Beach Bunny isn't targeted. They wanted to kill anything that was in the way to make sure that the Beach Bunny is protected so it went upriver. And they also dropped off their light vehicle group of Humvees or Warthogs, whatever in that kind of size scale you can imagine in a science fiction universe. They dropped off their 5 light vehicles, Saber, Avi, Desperados, Lightning, and Tabby. Funny enough, I think those guys are all veterans of campaign 1 and 2, actually, come to think about it. The light vehicles on the south side of the river are using what is called the assault order, meaning that if they get stopped by an enemy, they can fight that enemy. They can also push past or through that enemy. They can push that enemy back. Now, we're going to be rewording the rule set on order types for the next version, but that's basically what it means. Half your damage goes into pushing an enemy out of the way or back, and then the other half just goes into the, how much damage you can do into their health pools. So that was their plan. The rest of the Beach Bunny crew would stop off in between the rivers up north, and they would deploy. Engineers Dex and Beards would set up tank traps and barbed wire, of which they were going to set up multiple layers of. So if a tank came through, they would be very much slowed down. Same with infantry with the barbed wire, the razor wire, they're going to be slowed down. Medics set up a transport with a Logi transport, right? So like a truck. Dirt movers showed up with extra supply to help them do all this. They're ready to go. And they wanted the light mech lances to meet up with them after they arrived. And the light mechs are what ended up getting into a lot of combat. Also, Rabbit has one fighter, Cypher, who's flying up above them. So that's a thing. We also had a unit set to skirmish forward and then come back. I believe this was Puma and Ember and Lothcat and Fenrir. They're all light vehicles. They went on a little skirmish recon while all the construction was going on. That's the green arrows you see. Skirmish, if you don't remember from last episode, means that it is harder to hit an enemy because you're less accurate by 2 on the dice roll, so -2 on your attack rolls, but you're going so fast that you get a +3 to defense, meaning an enemy has to do a roll of 4 or better to hit you. It's really, really simple math. It makes sense when you're playing. It's like, oh, okay, I'm super maneuverable and I'm just hard to hit, but I just can't hit very well back. But it's great for scouting. And we set a line of sight or a fog of war reveal at 3 of the grid squares away from friendly units. So if an enemy is within 3 grid squares, you can see them and they show up on the map. Now there are some enemies that show up on the map anyways. A lot of the air units just show up everywhere there are because the Endurance and the Vigil are orbital warships, are picking them up, right, with their radar, sensors, what have you. And then there's a front line on the western side that is intel that we are getting from our employer. They're basically feeding us information from their spy and intelligence network. So if you see those and you're like, who's spotting those guys? That's where it's coming from. All right, so this was the plan. They also randomly had a light mech called UPD who was, I think, in a different battle group at the start of the game, ended up joining Rabbit midway through. He wanted to run between Cthulhu's objective, which I'll put their plan on the map now, or on the screen now. Their objective was to take the southern village north of the airfield and take the airfield down on the coast. And Blackout's plan was to drop in with a ton of vertical landing and takeoff VTOL craft. Think the equivalent of the Pelican from Halo, right? Or there's so many variations of them in the 40K universe. These are the science fiction equivalent of a Black Hawk helicopter or a Huey, and the big heavy transport helicopters that can move tanks, right? They're all there. Blackout was planning to drop in between the village and the power plant, and then push north and take the power plant in the hopes that they might get some kind of tactical advantage on the battlefield. If this is the primary source of power for all of Yos's forces of the entire city, then it might not be a bad idea for ARMCO to control it. So that was their objective. So what actually happened in all this? Well, let's see. On our landing, Cthulhu and Blackout actually did manage to make it to their landing sites. Crow found themselves pretty up against the wall when it came to the airfield to the south, but they also interrupted 3 enemy fighters from coming in to rearm. You notice a little orange dot in the bottom left-hand corner means that they've expended their ammunition and they're on their way back. Keep in mind, Yaz is fighting, currently invading another nation to the west. So without having time to prepare for us, what we're finding is him being in the middle of a conflict and then a force dropping on top of him. Multiple turrets, anti-tank and anti-infantry turrets that were set up at the airfield were taken out pretty quickly by the landing forces, and the rest of the units pushed north. Artillery was set up and dug in between both of the groups, both Blackout and Crow, and engineers built up sandbags to give them extra defense. Logistics were dropped off so that the artillery could fire for more than 1 round using the Logi trucks rolling off of the drop point. This was the real first indication that I need to come up with a better way of scaling how many units can be in an area, because we had so many people try to land in this location that they couldn't fit. Like, you'll notice the artillery doesn't have labels for what units are there because I didn't have space to have the labels there. So that's something that I'm trying to work on for the next campaign. But they did manage to land, and we even had 1 unit drop right off of the landing craft, set up immediately. It takes half the movement of an artillery piece to deploy. If you ever see the struts underneath the artillery piece, that means it's technically deployed and it can fire, and immediately fired a defensive barrage around friendly infantry while they were making their way towards the enemy airfield, giving them an extra defense bonus. Artillery has great range, but one of the things in this campaign, though it did have a limitation in the last one, in this one, artillery have no minimum fire range, so it was very close ranged artillery supporting fire. And I think I might just keep it that way. I don't think I have a problem with artillery not really having a minimum range now that they are a support kind of buffing, debuffing unit that fits a lot better with helping everybody else instead of just ganking stuff from, 5 squares away. Anyways, half of battle group Cthulhu pushed northward into the village, and they met some pretty heavy resistance. They had 4 units of infantry, squads of infantry set up. They had multiple light vehicles here, but because it was a surprise round, there wasn't nearly as much infantry as they would have run into had we actually took time to scan things and let our presence known. They also didn't have enough time to crew all their vehicles, so that you notice there's 2 grayed out light vehicles kind of towards the southern portion of the map you're looking at now. Those are empty, those are abandoned, and those will be important later. So what you see here is the surviving force. 2 light vehicles are running away up in the north side, enemy vehicles being chased by the rest of Cthulhu. They also have those little pips next to them, meaning that they've got a wound, they've got a hit marker on them. Light vehicles can only take 2 hits, so those vehicles are actually quite badly wounded. But nobody rolled high enough to disable their wheels or their weapon systems. Shout out to Ants, by the way, for constructing the bridge on the western side. You can see it there crossing the river. I messed up and didn't put you on the map for some reason in this first map. My apologies, because that bridge actually ended up being really, really useful, but they are on the later maps. Cool thing about this front line, you can see some of our heavy transports making their way south, as well as our heavy VTOLs. Every infantry group you can see on screen right now actually paradrop in using the hats. So they were able to deploy behind the village and then move in. And one of the requirements for dropping out of the back of a hat as infantry is that you have to have an open space to do so. They found a field. It also was the moment that I learned that, well, we have to define what it looks like to paratroop or paradrop infantry in, because people were just dropping them wherever they wanted to instead of how you'd imagine it to be, which would be a straight line, right? If you're dropping a stick of infantry, let's say a platoon of infantry out the back, they need to be within the pathway of where the hat wants to travel. So I ended up rearranging them, but that's what happened. So they dropped in that field to the left. The vehicles, the IFVs, pushed through the center. We did a bunch of rolls. They were all on assault. That's why you see the enemies fleeing, because all of that damage was rolled and then halved, and then the distance that the enemy fleed out of those buildings, meaning they lose all of their defensive bonuses because they were pushed out of those buildings, are now like out in the open, and they're all chasing them down. Not to mention, as we zoom forward, we zoom north, they're being pushed into the back end of Blackout, who landed in the upper field. Now, Cthulhu's Northern Force did not, including Blackout, did not have the best fight ever. If you notice, a lot of the rolls, especially in the southern fight, were quite low, and the enemy was dug into buildings, right? They were able to run into this local structures, or they were already set up in those structures because they were maybe military outposts or whatnot. So how did they manage to push them this far back? How did they manage to win this battle? And that is because of Rabbit's pathway and where they were going. Rabbit moved light mechs from south to north, who ended up joining in for the fight along their route before pushing on. And this was actually the beginning of a rule change that I've had to simplify. Originally, we were going to be kind of averaging damage, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but there was a way of averaging out damage where when all the infantry would fight another group of infantry, all the damage would be calculated, and then it would be divided by all the infantry who participated. And since then, as the fights got more complicated and we got more and more units into one area, that became harder and harder to do, to the point where now we just do a 1-for-1 roll, where one unit does an attack roll. This is what I talked about in the last video. Does an attack roll, say it's an infantry unit, they shoot at the unit they can do the most damage to, is probably the greatest threat and is within their firing range and they can actually see them. That's the target that your infantry or that unit of infantry will fight and fire at another one. And if you're running with a buddy, then that means the damage, or if the enemy is running with a buddy, damage is spread between one target, the next target, and the next target. That means that when you fire, then when your buddy fires, they will fire at a different target. And then if you have another buddy, they'll fire at a different target, meaning that it works the same way coming in. Like if you're being shot at and you're 3 battle tanks, you know, the first enemy will fire at you, and then the next enemy will fire at, if there is another target with you, say another battle tank, they'll fire at the next battle tank, if that makes sense. That means you don't get alpha striked because you're one guy and 5 enemy tanks decide to fire at you instead of, you know, fight the battle, the overall battle in that area. So it's always beneficial to run with another person. The change basically just simplified how easy it is to run this. If you see a circle, by the way, with a number on it, and it's not like a dice, D4s are very, very difficult to read. I am running this off a tabletop simulator, so if you wanted to be able to see what I rolled on a D4, if your weapon uses a D4 for its primary damage, I had to put a token on there because you wouldn't be able to see a D4 from above, clearly. So that's what those are. If you see those little black tokens with a white border around them and a number on it, that is the roll that they got with their light laser cannon or their, you know, heavy machine gun on a light vehicle, that kind of thing. So here is the player intentions, what I call the conflict map. Basically, I've looked at the player intentions, I've seen where the enemies are, and I've defined where a conflict is going to take place. This is Blackout having dropped at their landing zones and what they're running into. Ignore the anti-aircraft auto cannon at the northwest underneath the power plant. That thing is already fired. I believe it fired at one of the VTOLs that were flying in, kind of chased them off. So with the V3 rules, we've got multiple squads pushing towards power plant, trash bags, and another squad right behind them. We've got Fallen Prayers, which is a medic unit that's kind of following in behind to make sure that they heal anybody that takes hits. Let's see, Brawlers is in the center, who I know eat a lot of damage because of those light vehicles, if I remember right. We've got 2 friendly main battle tanks that are going to be getting some work done, and they're all operating under the assault order type. So everybody jumped in with the same order type, very simple rules, and this is the dream of the TACCOM and the GM to work out, right? Everybody working together with one objective: push these guys out of here, do as much damage as we can, and capture the power plant, which they almost managed to do in this fight. Now, they did run into the first enemy main battle tank, which is in the top right-hand corner, and this is pre-roll. Notice how everybody has a 1 next to their number for the dice. That means I haven't rolled yet, and you can see my example of how hard it is to read those D4. Now, Tabletop Simulator, which is a 3D tabletop piece of software, I play it off of Steam. I think it's the only place you can get it from. I really like it for running like D&D games or Star Wars tabletop games, but there is one major limitation to using something like this over, say, Photoshop, which is what we used for Campaign 2 and Campaign 1 for managing all this. And that limitation is I can't export a high resolution map. I'm literally having to take screenshots from top down and then build a map at higher resolution so that everyone can read names and see the roll on the dice and all that. It's a bit difficult, but it kind of works. So if you ever wonder why like some of the sections of the map are different colors when I zoom out, it's because it's a cobbled together map of various screenshots. And if something looks a little low resolution, I probably zoomed out too far when I took the screenshot. But anyways, let's look at the battle. The big orange arrow that you see in the center is incoming artillery fire from the forces in the south. And that main battle tank, if I remember, the enemy one on the top right, actually manages to track one of the tanks. Now here is the aftermath of the battle simulation, right? Friendly forces, actually this is right after the rolls were taking place. The fight rolled on and damage was calculated, and it was not looking great for friendly forces. Now I will show you the round complete where they're all pushed back, but the enemy managed to roll a 5 on their main battle tank, which a 5 and a 6 means that your tank or your vehicle takes subsystem damage if it has the subsystem tag in the unit description. On a 5, you get, your turret gets knocked out, I believe, and a 6 is you're tracked, you can't move. These things can be fixed by the crew if they want to get out. That means they won't have any armor, they can't move, and it takes a whole round to do it. Or engineers, if they've got supplies, they can also fix it. You also take a hit. So in this case, we've lost 1 turret, but our infantry, actually our 2 armored units down here, our main battle tanks, both fired at the only hostile tank because he didn't have a buddy. That means that both tanks got the slam rounds into him because he's the primary target, and tanks always fire at tanks if there is an opportunity. There is a red line coming off the screen from the right-hand side, and that's actually a shot coming from, I believe, one of Hammer's tanks at the very edge of their maximum range. This was the biggest threat, and they could see it. And so I was like, well, they did roll a 6, they rolled really high, they're gonna hit something really important, and they had a shot on it, and it was like, by all the rules, that was the target it should have fired at. So it like reached across the map at its maximum range and managed to slap that tank and destroy it. That's one of the mechanics that I really like about Campaign 3's new test campaign, and it's how vehicles are handled. They have a hit system, where it's not about what the dice rolls and how much health they have. They can be hit a certain number of times, and then their vehicle is left destroyed. Tanks have the most hits at 3. Light vehicles have 2 hits, but they don't have any armor. And if you don't puncture armor, then you don't take a hit. So armor can be really, really great for having survivability on those tanks. It gives them more survivability than they had in previous games where you could just get wrecked in 1 round. Same thing's gonna be true for power armor when we bring back the upgrade and side grade system, which is gonna be really fun, I think. But yeah, they managed to hold out. Now, they did push them back. Notice the casualties across the board, right? For all of the infantry here, they're badly, badly wounded. And that's because the enemy they were fighting at all rolled fairly well. They had a lot of light vehicles, and they all rolled, greater than I think half of their dice pool for damage. But also, friendly forces were in an open field. They weren't in cover. All the enemies had structures. They were in buildings, so that means they had a +1 to their defense. So even the damage that they could have done was kind of nerfed a little bit by the fact that the enemy was in a stronger position. But that kind of changes when you force them out of those buildings, and now you're kind of giving chase. And that's where they're at the very end of round 1. Let's talk about the non-mechs in the fighting force that is rapid. In the south, the light vehicles went a-scouting, and did they find something? Well, they found that the enemy had set up multiple bridges. One bridge made sense across a river, and on that bridge, they found a convoy of logistics vehicles currently moving towards the west, most likely a resupply for the invading force against Yoss's neighbor. The other thing they found was a main battle tank on top of a hill, and they found another transport with a turret on the back. Now that was in formation. This image that you're seeing is after the battle was taking place. The battle was an interesting one to try to figure out, and I actually had to work through some of our combat mechanics, and this is actually the point where we went to a 1-to-1 targeting, because the way we originally did it didn't work. But we found the enemy has some kind of little birds, small helicopters. They can harass, and they're quite fast, which, by the way, is still alive and still chasing them as of round 3. That little bird has survived somehow, some way, chasing them. And because they've been on the maneuver mode, they've really just been getting missed the entire time, which I find really, really funny. So what happened here? Well, when our friendly scouts arrived, they found the convoy was there and multiple targets that they really couldn't do much damage to. The light vehicles fired at the things that they could actually damage, which was the trucks and the transport truck, but they couldn't, as a group, damage the tank. Not really. Blackwing, sadly, the bomber dropped in, tried to drop a bomb on top of the tank, but rolled really, really poorly. They only rolled a 3. Armor on a tank is a 3. The tank, though, rolled a 6 on its shot, which damaged the first target that it fired at, which was Tabby's light vehicle. So imagine that light vehicles had like the axle blown off, or in this case, immobilized would probably be like a tire blown because it could be fixed. And we've even discussed, me and Tabby, having an upgrade for light vehicles, which is a replacement tire so that you can quickly and rapidly just get rid of an immobilized state as a light vehicle, because that is kind of a death sentence for light vehicles because they're supposed to be fast. But that's how the rolls worked out. Not great. None of them rolled high enough except for lightning to do damage to the tank. And since we are spreading out the damage, they just fired all into the convoy, destroying it. It did stop a lot of supplies, though, or whatever was in those transports. And then, well, we'll find out what happens to Rabbit later. On the other side of Rabbit's front line, Rabbit's scouting efforts were not in vain. They located another convoy heading towards the west, as well as two, what we later discovered were heavy infantry VTOLs. That means they carry 2 infantry units instead of just 1, but they can't carry vehicles. Flying around out there. Those will be major trouble for Icarus later on in the campaign. The convoy is made up of 2 main battle tanks, 2 transports, and what looks like a more standardized VTOL. That, from what we can tell so far, can only carry infantry and not vehicles. Nothing in contact, and our fighters flew out. Cypher was joined up with another battle group's fighter, and I can't remember what group he was from. I think it's ATC. They joined up together to fly in formation together to protect each other. They also spotted 2 more of these bridges. Again, a bridge over what is an elevation change. That's what that color means. That means that the elevation is going up. And then one over a river. Now, our vehicles don't have trouble going up and down these elevation changes. That was a rule change to keep things simple for the TACCOMs. I decided to just kind of ignore elevation changes for this campaign for the players. The enemies, though, I guess their engines just aren't that great. They can't seem to get up those very fast, so it slows them down unless they have a bridge. Now, this video is supposed to be considered week 2, so let's look at the completed map of week 2 and see where we ended up. Now, I am avoiding talking about the major instances of what's going on like Hammer and Atlas's side, because I think those are going to be really important for our turn 3 video that we're going to do. So we're going to just focus on these battle groups. That way we can tell their stories in a more complete way, because I don't know how they're going to turn out, but I think it'll be more fun to walk through their entire event. So let's look at Crow, let's look at Blackouts, and look at Rabbit's turn 2 in state. Rabbit might be the funniest one of the group, because that group of light vehicles took off running back toward Blackout and Cthulhu's area. Those tanks were going to be a problem. They've got too much armor. It's time to leave. So they jumped into skirmish mode, which is the green lines, and then the group ran back towards the bridge that Ants built. Hey, Ants, you're back on the map now. Ignore all the air battle stuff. We're going to talk about that later. On the way out, they did get shot at. Now, remember how I said that Tabby was immobilized in turn 1? They decided, instead of trying to fix the issue, because I don't think they had an engineer on board at the time, it was better off that they abandoned the light vehicle. Tabby and crew jumped out of their light vehicle, jumped into the other light vehicles as cargo. Remember, light vehicles can carry a single infantry unit as long as they're split between 2 vehicles. This is going to be more defined in the next rule set, but that's basically how they work. So she jumped out of her vehicle, her 3-person team, and then jumped into another light vehicle that was in the group, and they all sped off running away. The tank fired a roll while chasing, and so did the immobile turret that was damaged. It also fired a roll, and it missed both of them because this time they were in skirmish mode. And both of those vehicles, both of those weapons, the main battle tank and the turret, both rolled a 3. A skirmishing vehicle that's only light mechs and light vehicles get a -3 to any incoming attack roll, meaning it was a 0, and so it didn't do any damage. At the same time, they had read over the map, and remember those light vehicles that I talked about before? The loot goblins were strong in this one, and Tabby and team drove over to where those abandoned light vehicles were and just stole one of Yoss's. They asked me, can we do that? And I was like, yeah, why not? They're light vehicles just like yours. They've got a machine gun on the top. They have the same stats. Feel free if you want to just try to go over there and steal one. And they did. Funny enough, Beards, the engineer group, was already down there. In their orders, they wrote, looking for intelligence. I rolled a 1d4 to see if they found anything of interest. They rolled a 1, and all they found was a bag of potato chips. This was a mid-round event. And yeah, we've been joking about how everyone has now acquired potato chips. that is how we tell the ongoing story. These mid-round events are like posts that show up. Desperados and Avi and Lightning and Saber are all now down in the south, and notice all of the air units that are starting to stock up above the Cthulhu Blackout battlefield. Now, this was a plan by our pilots. They made the assumption that Yoss's current fighters, remember the ones that were out of ammo to the south, would want to come back to base to reload. And since the enemy forces have lost all airfields but the one inside the central stronghold, that they would try to beeline it straight for the stronghold. In that stronghold, it was revealed that the enemy had multiple fighters ready to launch already. They had a squadron in there. So how many players are on the map right now in front of us? I'd say, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. 12 fighters are currently in the field. Those are 12 players who said, hey, let's all, in different battle groups, rendezvous at these coordinates and then intercept any air that comes through. Yoss's forces launched. This was all written out on a map, what they were planning on doing, which was going to be escort the friendly fighters back. So now you've got 5 enemy fighters in the northeast, and then the 4 in the southeast, that's all the fighters that were down there all together, making a run for the airfield and getting into this giant fuzzball of an air battle. It was good tactics on the part of the players to kind of guess what the enemy was going to do and be in a position to take advantage of it, and it worked really well for them, because remember, 3 of these 8 or 9 enemy fighters didn't have ammo. They couldn't do attack rolls. You'll notice there's no dice on those fighters because they had already done their rolls. So it gave them a major advantage because half of them couldn't fight. And so the rolls were done. Every dice that you see on top of a fighter is what they rolled. The little orange dot means that they've expended their ammunition and they have to go back to an airfield to a airfield that we control to rearm. That has supply, because every rearm uses up a supply, so we're burning supply really fast. Our heavy air transports have been getting a lot of work done, moving supply off of our orbital carriers, which are in the south over the water, and bringing those to the airfields so that everyone can stay repaired, rearmed, and ready to fight. And that's how the fight went down. Air units right now are the only units that currently add up all of their FS during air battles and then divide by the number of enemies. We might change this if we can come up with a better, more unique system, but in this case, I think it worked out great. Notice that all of our aircraft are now damaged around 3 FS. I think there was 1. I think Thunderbolt had already taken damage and is now down to 1 FS, 1 force strike, meaning badly damaged, pieces of the plane are rattling off. Also, the fight continues in the north for Blackout. If we scroll up there, you'll see the return of the Rabbit light mech lances rushing in from behind them, also being chased by a freaking helicopter, which is a little irritating. The light mechs came back to give some support to the ground forces that were so badly wounded in the first round. Those troops have been reinforced by battle bots, dropped off, I think, by Foxbat, if I remember correctly. We've got bolts in there supporting fire. We've got 2 more light mechs, Tempest and Kodiak have showed up, and Druid, the IFV. We've got a bunch of assaulting IFVs and ground forces all dropping off medics that are badly needed, like Boneworks and Scars. So it's been great. It's been really cool to see this. We even have a latecomer who had signed up for the campaign but hadn't deployed. I don't know if this was a tactical choice, if they just missed the deadline, but it means Vulcan was able to drop from orbit. Now, when you drop from orbit, it uses all of your movement. But you can drop over whatever it is you want to be at, and they dropped over the anti-air turret and dropped a bomb, and I believe, they rolled a 6. I can see it on the map now. They rolled a 6, which is more than enough damage to destroy one of those AA auto cannons. You can also see some orange text at the top right-hand corner of one of the squares. That is defensive artillery fire coming in from the south, and also offensive artillery fire. Defensive means that they're putting up a kind of an artillery shield. They're firing off rounds and surrounding friendly forces with explosions to keep the enemy at bay. While also the offensive bombardment is lowering the enemy defenses. So if they manage to get into any of those buildings, and infantry will always try to scurry into a building if they have the opportunity for cover, it removes some of that benefit. The tiny little buildings, the little blue buildings, are worth 1 defense, and the larger buildings are worth 2 defense. And when you're getting bombarded by 2, is it all defense? Yeah, if you're getting bombarded by enemy artillery, you're gonna get that defense just removed, and it's really nice to even out the odds. Any of the friendly infantry you see with a blue icon, that's one of the ways that we decided to represent medics doing their jobs. Medics can heal up to 2 separate units for 1 force strength, and so I was representing all the good work that the medics were doing by, turning them blue and showing them that way. This was also the moment where we came up with this concept. We haven't implemented it yet. This concept of how we can represent casualties on the board, and how casualties, like wounded basically, we can have wounded collected, maybe even brought to mashes, because we're physically representing individuals on the map as those black little dots that have been knocked out of the fight. They could be collected by light vehicles or logi trucks and stretchers and sent to a place where they can get healed as like a force strength pool that could be picked back up later for people who need them, or for VTOLs flying in like Hueys, flying in squad reinforcements so people can get their FS back up when they're not near a medic. There's a few ideas that we're gonna start experimenting with. But overall, you can see exactly what happened here. The reinforcements arrived, engineers have landed, more troops are coming in from Crow. The light mechs have decided to do a little drive-by in skirmish mode, meaning they're only doing half damage, but they get that defense bonus, and then they're heading straight back north. We even had a group of light vehicles move farther north, but they've clearly won this battle. The enemy is down to 3 infantry remaining, half a squad, all heading for the hills and running away. And as of the round we're currently in, Blackout is going to be taking control of the power plant and have decided, I believe, based on the conversations I've seen on the Discord, to shut down the power, and temporarily, through intelligence gathered by our medics helping the local civilian population, shutting down their anti-air defense over the stronghold. So that is where Cthulhu, Blackout, and Rabbit currently are. They've got a group, Rabbit's got a group of light vehicles, the same group that helped themselves to those, to that enemy light vehicle are heading north, and Icarus is having a hell of a fight. We're gonna go through the other battle groups in more detail, just like this episode in the next one, and I'm kind of breaking them off into telling the stories of those individual groups, I think per week. I think it's a good way of doing it, because there's just so much going on, and if I was jumping between battle groups, it might be tough. But we're already like 36 minutes into this video, so if you want to see more of this, let me know and do all the YouTube stuff. You guys know what's up. If you want to join us for the next campaign, I do not have a time frame on when that's going to be, because we're currently in the middle of one. Head on over to the ARMCO Discord and then pop on into the meta chat, the meta campaign area. That's where we do all the setup for this, and we talk about how to make it better and how to make it flow better. And if you want to be a TACCOM or maybe even a future GM, that's a great place to go to get set up for it. Thank you everybody for watching me and joining me for the shenanigans that is the meta campaign. It has been fun and ridiculous, and I'm loving it. So thank you for just being a part of it. And if it's just even watching videos, I will catch you all in the next one. Later, everybody.